Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 2 years, I've interviewed over 150 people around this question, not to provide you with the universal answer, but to help you find and define your own answer to this question. Well, I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience. On the 21st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, I'm joined by Katrijn van Oudheusden, who is the author of Selfless Leadership, a writer, a coach, and a guide. Her work focuses on helping you see through the illusion of the separate self. In this episode, Katrijn takes us on an investigation and exploration of the paradigm of the separate self. She references neuroscience, physics, and the traditions of Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, etc., which have been saying for centuries that there is no separate self. Katrijn shares her own path in coming to this realization and how this awareness leads to a life of freedom where everything has meaning and where one doesn't take things so personally or feel so small and disconnected. Look, I found this conversation to be absolutely captivating, challenging, and enlivening. And regardless of the beliefs that you hold, I believe this episode will be a valuable tool in your own investigation of both reality and what is a good life for you. If you enjoy this conversation and this podcast, please like, share, leave reviews, and subscribe, as I'd greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 21st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Katrijn, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. I've discovered your work in the last week and I've been pretty captivated by it. So I was very much looking forward to having this conversation with you this morning.
Captivated is super. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Well, Katrijn, as I tend to kick these conversations off, it's with the question of, is there a question that you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Well, yes, and it changes all the time. So right now, I'd say the question is, how can more people come into contact with the message that I'm all about, which is that our true nature is free from the limitations of being a separate self. And I guess we'll go into that, what that means. And it's something everybody should have access to because it's our true nature. It's about who we essentially are as human beings, or what we are as human beings. And the question now is how to spread this message in a way that more people can hear it.
Can you just, as you kind of said, we'll get more into it. Can you elaborate on that sense of the separate self?
Yeah, so we grow up in a paradigm believing from the age of about 18 months that we are separate selves. So there's a person here within this body, an entity that is the subject to my life. And this is what was given the name Katrijn, it's me. And I start believing as a very, very small child that it is my duty and responsibility to live my life. So I do this thing called life. It's personal. I think, I do, I choose, I act. And that's an illusion. It's actually not true. The really, really interesting thing is that this has scientific support, cognitive science, neuroscience, and modern physics as well, recent discoveries. And it has a long, long, long tradition in Eastern thought, Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, forms of Zen Buddhism, and other traditions that have been saying for centuries there is no separate self. And that's just the illusion that we're born into this world with. But we can actually see through that. We can see that it is an illusion, right? Like the mirage in the desert. Once you see it's a mirage, you think, oh, there's water out there, right? And if I run towards it, I will get a cool drink in the desert. So you're constantly running towards this water because you think there's a mirage, there's water there. But you can wake up to the fact that it is a mirage. There is no actual water there. And that frees you from running towards it all the time. It's a great metaphor.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Almost like the idea of us perpetually chasing mirages.
Yes.
The idea then, Katrijn, to someone who's listening to this and let's say they're maybe uninitiated in some of this inquiry, you've just said there that it's an illusion, right? This idea that Mark is going through life and Mark is living life and Mark is in control of his life and Mark is making all these very succinct decisions and logical decisions. How would you kind of guide someone into even just realizing that it's there's somewhat of a mirage at play here?
It's a longer process. And before we start that, it's really important to say we're not denying reality, right? There is obviously
Yeah.
something that looks like a body, and you have experiences. There are experiences. So there are sensations, there are feelings, there are thoughts. So it's not denying any of that. But the added idea that this is being experienced by a separate person called Mark, that is the illusion. So what is experiencing this? And that's actually, these are two sides that I would start someone off with. If there's no separate self experiencing life, what is it that experiences life? So one way to become aware of that is to ask yourself really the question, right now, in this moment, what is it that is experiencing? And to go there in your experience, right? So what is hearing my voice right now? And not to answer that with thinking, but to move there, to experience the experiencer. What is hearing my voice right now? And almost everyone comes into contact with this sense of awareness. It's just an aliveness. It's that which woke up this morning, right, and started experiencing the world. Now we assume, because we've been taught that that is a separate person, the experiencer. Well, that's me, this limited person. And then we can start the questioning, well, can I find any limits, for example, to this awareness, to what is experiencing life? If I close my eyes and just fall into that, into the experience of hearing the voice, of sitting on a chair, everything I'm experiencing, can I find any limits to that awareness? And in this type of format, various questions. Am I the body, right? What is the body? Where does it begin? Where does it end? We can start to explore and come to the experience, the lived experience, that there actually is no separation, no separate person experiencing life. That's a construct, a mental construct. And various things can help. So the science side of this helps, okay? When we find out or we realize that before the age of 18 months, a baby has no sense of self, that's an indicator. Oh, wow, we actually have to teach a baby that it's separate, that it's an entity, that it is Mark or John or whoever. It has to learn that. Well, that's some pretty good evidence that maybe this is a construct. And then things like modern the cognitive science that's coming out at the moment, that we don't actually experience, or that there are not actually separate physical objects out there. So if I hold a pen in my hand, let me do that because otherwise it's kind of weird.
I can demonstrate on your behalf.
So this pen in my hand, we've learned to believe that this is a separate physical object out there, and I'm somewhere in here experiencing it. And what modern cognitive science says is, well, no, this is actually, I see this as a pen because the senses I evolved to have, sight, for example, interprets this, which is just vibrations of consciousness, interprets it as a pen. So I see an icon kind of on my own interface that looks like a pen, and you do too, because you evolved the same interface. So we both discuss this pen as though it were an object out there, and we're experiencing it. And that is duality, something we evolution. Well, if we follow the theory of evolution, then that is something that our senses evolved to perceive. And we all talk about it as though it were reality. But it's actually the way we as human beings experience reality. And now there are theories that say reality, including us, everything, is just mind. It's just it's only consciousness. And everything is a vibration, a pattern of vibrations, which I see as another human being, for example, or even as my body.
This is, with that exercise when you're just saying, where are you hearing this? I find in my own experience of life that I can fall into this deep. I almost view it as like an overall pool. Like I can drop into this pool where everything just feels expansive, vast, and infinite, and like a collective. And then I'm back into Mark. What question will I ask now? Do you know what I mean? Like, or like, it's this. How do you kind of experience that in terms of what, with all that you're exploring and that you're teaching? Do you find yourself having that duality of experience, and is it a continuous reminder, or how would you kind of categorize your experience of this?
This is always really difficult to explain. So, from my point of view, the way we experience reality will always be dual, right? We're born into this body with these senses. I'm always going to experience you as a separate person and this pen as a separate object. I'm not going to undo my senses or the way I am in this life. So the experience is the same, but you can at the same time know, like Santa Claus doesn't exist, or there is no tooth fairy, assuming you know this, or that Harry Potter doesn't exist.
Oh, now you've gone too far.
Okay, forget the Harry Potter part. Obviously, he exists. You can know that there is no real separate self, even though you experience life that way. And it is the knowing of that changes the quality of your experience. Because if you believe, right, that I am this separate person who needs to grow, develop, do my life, improve, get things right, get along well with other people, then that is what creates all the stress and the anxiety and the worry, what the Buddhists call suffering, psychological suffering. Knowing that there is no separate person, even though it looks like that, even though the whole world acts as though there were, that is the freedom. So it's the same experience, but expansive and without these limitations of, oh, poor little me, how am I going to survive? What am I going to do? Who am I? Am I good enough?
So this is last year I tried to live my life under the experiment or assumption that there's absolutely no free will, right? Strange thing to do for a couple of months, but this is where my curiosity lies sometimes. And I was really intrigued to see just like, and you know what, this wasn't a perfect experiment, and it wasn't like I was always in this holding this belief or this assumption, but there's so like I'm really intrigued by the idea of me falling back into my natural self. Like, I have this idea of life, either whether it's through our belief systems, our top 5 tips to be more effective, or whatever it is, and we add all these things on. And what we really need to do is like almost like a collective exhale and just a releasing of a grip, rather than clenching onto life or trying to control things. But there's something still where even within this, and if I explore, where did that thought come from? That's a question I love to ask my mind sometimes in meditation if it's busy, and my mind's like, oh, okay, quieten down for a moment, and we'll hit him with something else in a few minutes, and we'll distract him again. Or even my emotions. Like, I don't wake up, even if I'm doing lots of healthy processes, I can wake up feeling a bit shit sometimes. Or I can wake up feeling amazing even if I haven't done all my perfect processes. So it doesn't feel to me like I'm in control of my emotions as such, although my thoughts and my actions previous to that may affect them. There's something really, it's almost then like that there's almost like this deep trust that we can fall into, though, if we relinquish things. It's like this really counterintuitive sense of it. If I completely try to let go of the idea that I'm actually in control, there's this, you almost fall into the space that you were kind of guiding me into around, where do you actually hear this? But it seems so bloody scary, because the thing we want to do, and even still now, I still want to win. Do you know what I mean? I still want to write a great book. I want this to be a successful podcast. Do you get me? So but then, as you say, it's like almost holding that and being okay with that's what you're observing. But there's a deeper reality at play.
Yes. So I think you just answered half my podcast. Or this is usually what I really have to guide people through because they're not there yet. So you've seen things with your experiment. It's actually the first insight in the book I wrote, Selfless Leadership, that there is no doer. We are being lived. And you're right. If you look, for example, one of the exercises is find the decider, right? Where, if you look in great detail, minute detail at your life, where do decisions come from or choices? And those specific thoughts are important because they assume the sense of free will and choice and volition. Well, they just appear out of nowhere. And then immediately the brain comes up with a story that explains why you chose that, or that it's congruent or not. If it's not, it's because you slept badly, or whatever the
Yeah.
explanation is. So you're already down that road, which is great. And the thing that then hangs us up is that free will, or the sense of I choose, I do life, is the separate self. The core of being me is the idea that I can do something. So it's the last stronghold of ego that, well, there must be something. Okay, I can fall into life and let everything flow, and that's all great, and things will happen, and que sera, sera, whatever my version is, totally at peace. But, but, not this. There's this tiny area, I don't know, my health, or for me, for a long time, it was eating healthily, for example, or fitness. No, that I need to control. And you
Yeah.
don't really admit it to yourself, but there's this core sense of, well, but there is a me. There's something that I do. I'm here, right? You can't negate yourself. So that's actually the last hang up, and something that people get stuck in, a self trying to convince itself that it doesn't exist, or it has no agency or no choice. You can get stuck there for a long time, and that's also just what happens. But it's actually then seeing in direct experience, no, look, there is only this. All there is reality without the separate self. You cannot find a separate self or any micro bit of agency, volition. This is my turf and I control it. But you have to do the investigation and see that.
So now maybe you can guide me to this, because this is one thing I struggle with. There's a Stanford neuroendocrinologist called Robert Sapolsky, who I started watching his lectures, and he's adamant that there isn't a shred of free will. And of course, I find that almost like an assault on my senses when I first discovered it a few years ago, and it's softened since. But what are we talking about then sometimes, when if I hear even him talk with Sam Harris or something like this, but then they're very much in, so what we can learn from this or what we can do from this. And at this point I'm kind of like, but is this not just, is my only role in life simply to observe, and just I'm part of this. I get to view the, because whatever my position or perspective is in life, I get to observe the inner workings of this thing that I am, and I get to view life from this perspective, this carrier of my consciousness. Like how, where does the kind of doing, or even the suggestion that we investigate, you're saying, okay, well, this is how I guide people into it, is where does the choice come in any of this then, if you get me, or the kind of direction?
There is no choice. So this happens or it doesn't.
Right.
And that's why coaching this or guiding this, it's actually all, bullshit. It doesn't work that way. A more accurate way of saying that is that consciousness, which is all there is no personal consciousness. So this is consciousness speaking and consciousness speaking.
Yeah.
It's a conversation within consciousness from different localizations, you could say, of the same thing. It's not a thing, but of the same consciousness. And the problem with language, so as soon as we use words like consciousness, we thingify it and we make it into something that we, the illusory subject, tries to grasp with the mind. So the only solution to this is what is beyond the mind. So when you ask these questions, right, I try to be I try to understand or being conscious, there's always an I in that sentence. Otherwise, we can't even speak. So our whole language, all of thought, all of language is from the assumption of the separate self. So what we're talking about, haha, paradox, is something that's not, you can't talk about it because as soon as you put it into words, you've separated it into an object and a subject. And that's the theoretical explanation from something that you can experience it, it can be experienced because we are it. So it's so paradoxical. We try to figure it out in language, try to talk about it, and all of that makes it more complicated than it is. Because it's super, super simple. It's literally that which is. That which is experiencing this is not subdivided into little boxes of people and animals and plants and whatever else we think is conscious. It changes over time. But there's just this one, another metaphor, ocean, multidimensional, pulsating ocean of consciousness. And another great analogy to understand this, which cannot be understood by the mind, is that there are localizations of consciousness. So Bernardo Kastrup uses the term whirlpool, that in this multidimensional ocean vibrating consciousness, individual whirlpools form that turn in on themselves. So it's consciousness turned in on itself that feels like it's separate from the rest. But this feeling of separation is only a feeling, a sense. If you have whirlpools in a stream, they're not actually separate from the water.
So I always find it so funny then for me to carry on talking after someone's just said that. Whenever I have conversations like this, I'm like, okay, I'll be the idiot and pick up the baton and carry on the conversation now. But the thing that I'm so curious then about if all this is like one body of consciousness, which from an experience, from just various experience I've had in life, that feels intuitive to me. Also, even intellectually, like I know you can't fully capture it, but like I'm like, okay, that aligns with my experience of life. So then, does it matter what any of us are doing anyway? Like, do you get me? Like, if it is just all one giant body, and that is the reality, what's the not the motivation, but like are like is it supposed to be any other way other than most people not even being, let's say, aware of, and I don't mean that in a judgy way, but like if people aren't considering that this is a deeper reality, a deeper connection, like is it supposed to be any other way, or are we just literally these fragments, or these fragments within, let's say, a mosaic, right? So when I say fragments, I don't mean completely separate, but there does, as you say, these whirlpools, or there's some distinction. Like why then engage in this, or why be aware of this? Do you get kind of where I'm stumbling for a question here, but I hope I've given you enough to respond.
Yes, and it's a typical question, but the question is again from the separate self. So something that believes it's separate in this reality needs to have a purpose. But you intuited it already, because at the beginning you said, well, or is there just this? And that is completely outside of human purpose, motivation, morality, ethics. It just is. And it's doing itself, and it's unfolding, and even unfolding is too much action. And obviously it's happening and is vibrating, and I don't know anything about, I'm not a metaphysicist. I can't give you some, the meaning of life. But those types of questions don't really come up anymore, because look at this, it's just, it's beyond words, it's beyond description. And then often people fall into poetry, or in I guess that's where the whole concept of God and higher power and all of that, it's for the tiny refraction or whirlpool that believed it was separate within this. Yeah, things need to make sense. There needs to be a purpose, because otherwise I'm small and separate, and I have no meaning. But if there is only everything, everything has meaning. The whole thing is the meaning. That's a very poor way of expressing it, but
No, no,
it's
no,
all
no.
I can come up with.
No, that felt satisfying to me. So then, in terms of like, this is what I'm so intrigued by. Like, so I always think of the idea of this sometimes of when I walk my dog, right, and I'm halfway home, and my mind's like going, okay, you're halfway home now. That means there's another 15 minutes. I'm going, and it's plotting out the route, and maybe even thinking what I'm doing when I go home. But none of that really contributes to the thing that's happening. Like, I will walk with or sorry, this movement will happen, right? And it's not predicated on the thinking of my mind. And so I guess then from my perspective, it's so interesting because I'm in a process myself of just trusting this, and it also but really like letting this shape my how I even approach work and things like this. And so this is I'm trying like I'm trying to release or let go of control a bit, but I think I'm doing it a bit clumsily too. You know what I mean? Like maybe a little impractically at times, or
the
maybe not.
the
We
only
shall see.
thing that's in there in what you just said is the I am doing.
Yeah,
So that has to go, to put it in a very you have to do something which you can't do. But there's still the idea that there is a separate Mark doing something. So for example, letting go, living life this way. No, it just is, all of it simultaneously.
that sounds beautiful. And with this, then just your own journey, I'm really intrigued by because I don't know your full journey. I get a sense from your posts that perhaps you tried to approach this from a certain perspective, like a spiritual, maybe a guided sense of this is how it all goes. This is how one becomes enlightened. This is what one has to do. Could you give us a sense just how you've come to this perspective or this position or however way you describe it?
Yeah, it started more in self-help kind of personal life things. So I'm not good enough, I need to improve. And this improvement went into the self-help thing with I need to work on my inner child. I need to figure out what I'm so traumatized by, why I feel so depressed and all this stuff. So went into psychology, but also Buddhism, meditation, lots of different reading, following courses, following people, teachers. And then by accident, or just as things happen, I stumbled upon this, what's called the direct path, which is direct pointing to there is no separate self. Our true nature is just boom, all of this. And you can see this, you can know this because you are it. So you don't have to go into a monastery and meditate for 30 years. You don't have to work on your inner child and you don't have to find pink unicorns. It's just obvious, but we miss it because we've been taught something different for years and years and years. Everybody pretends there's a separate self and we're not consciousness. And you've been believing this all your life. So we miss the obvious, what's right under our nose, also called the open secret. It's here. Everybody experiences life that way because we are this oneness and we're all misidentified with an illusion. Real perceptions, it feels that way, it looks that way, but it's not what it seems. And by discovering that over time, which is not really how it happened, you see this, it sees itself, and then it just doesn't make sense to go back to, oh, I'm this separate person with a development goal and I need to do things to myself when there is no doer, when there is no entity. So things just fall away. And for me, that meant that in my personal life, things fell away, problems fell away, and then it slowly, and this is talking, now from looking back, that's how it seems. It moved into work or into what I do, which is talk about this and write about this. But for a long time, I still had very, very strong beliefs about no, work, that's serious. Work, everybody believes and is a separate self. So what am I going to do and, sit there saying that's wrong or that's not the case? I'll be outcast, right? That doesn't work. But I found myself doing it anyway. And now I do this on podcasts, which if you had told me this 7 years ago, I would have said, you're nuts. No, I will never speak about this.
What what emerged or what occurred that there was a comfort to speak about this?
I always end up putting this in the negative because it's more like I stopped doing the other stuff and I stopped not speaking about it because it's what's true for me.
That's so you got it, like you stopped like almost like standing in the way of the river, like you stopped obstructing something, or
Yes, it was the I, the belief stopped going into these beliefs that is not what one does.
and when you're when you're experiencing life like this, like what are the kind of clear like do you fall, like do you still find yourself kind of like the way I'm thinking about it in my head is almost like expanding and contracting almost. So the expanse is the immersion with this idea or with the experience that there is no separate self, and then I'm almost viewing it like, in my experience, like it almost contracts then when I deeply identify with the separate self again. Do you like, what's the difference in the quality of your experience as you move through life, having dropped this illusion?
So I didn't drop the illusion, I was dropped. Which is a
Okay.
stupid way of speaking, but it's important because that's where the misunderstanding comes from, that there is a person going into and out of this experience. That's not how it is. There is only this experience, and it's not an experience. It's knowing. The experience is like you're an actor in a play playing a separate person. You cannot exit the play. Okay, sort of like the movie of your life is running. You don't write the script is being written for all of us. All of it is being done. You believe you're the separate character in the movie. What you realize that not only are you not this actor, you're the whole thing. You're the movie screen, you're the theater, you're everything. You're all the other actors. All of it is one. So from the point of view of the apparent character, the actor, it feels like, oh, sometimes there's an experience of expansion. Sometimes there's an experience of contraction. That's not what this is about. Sometimes you have an experience of pain. Sometimes you have experience of pleasure as the actor. That's just experience. We make the mistake of saying these expanded experiences, that's awareness, or that's consciousness, or that's what we're trying to achieve. No, that's just like sometimes you feel good, sometimes you feel bad. It's irrelevant. The whole spiritual stuff is about these experiences of the actor. What I'm talking about is all of it. What the whole thing is and appears within. That is it. So the experience of going into and out of something is not even relevant to this discussion. You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's it's
yeah.
it's it's almost impossible to explain, but that's, and this is not a
No, no,
problem. That's just how it happens. So it's okay. That's, we have little refractions of consciousness experiencing their lives as going into expansion and constriction of consciousness, of their personal consciousness. That's great. You know, that's just how life is. But that's not understanding that there is no separate self and that all there is consciousness.
just trying to sit with that for a moment. And as I mentioned, like I find this these conversations, particularly in the role of interviewer, sometimes I just want to kind of sit with this for a moment and just kind of let it run through, or like for it to run through me a little bit. The the sense then of it's almost like it sounds to me then like an immersion in reality, like without, as I said, without like moving beyond then this idea of even what I was saying there of expanding and contracting. It's 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 just it's beyond this single point or perception of
It's
I in
the realization that there is only everything, and that the feeling and the sense of a local contraction is nothing more than a feeling or a sense of a local contraction.
Okay, so without me asking a question that is like just going to be like that's I'm just intrigued then from you, how coming to this realization, and excuse me if I'm being clumsy with language in
No, and
terms
forget the
of just
language, right? You never get that
yeah,
right.
okay,
So
yeah. So you have this realization, you've gone through this process of, okay, look, I'm trying to be better, I'm trying to heal my inner child, I'm trying to experience these deeper senses of consciousness from the perspective of I, almost in a spiritual path. Can you give me an insight into what your experiences of life have been, almost like pre and post, if that's not too reductive, if you get me?
yeah, and again, that's something that I can only really explain in the negative, because it's exactly the same, only it's no longer so personal. So for example, the job or what I do, work, let's call it that. This is not my work. This is not something I do. I don't write books. I don't write on LinkedIn. I don't do interviews. It's just there's a very obvious sense of that is simply what occurs. I have a fight with someone. I have a disagreement. This is not my disagreement. This is not my action, oh, I'm so stupid. Why am I having this fight with someone? Why is there conflict? I shouldn't have conflict because I'm some kind of spiritually advanced person. No, it's just conflict. And even that is too much, giving it too much name. No, it's not a conflict. It is an exchange of words. Where do these words come from? I don't know. Where does the action come from? That's just what's occurring. And then the immediate reaction of the separate self is, oh no, this goes beyond, now we're outside of morals and ethics. Everything will go to shit. The whole world is going to, go downhill because there's no personal responsibility and there's no morality and no ethics. But that is part of the action. I've noticed that I act ethically and somebody else doesn't. That has nothing to do with me or with them. That's just the expression. You could say consciousness expresses as a moral person or expresses as Putin. So it takes the personal out of it. It takes the self and all the suffering and the worry and the I need to do this, I need to improve. It takes that out. But the experience is the same. So if you now insult me and you say you're the most ridiculous podcast guest I've ever had, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or something that I would really, in my previous life would have really hit me. Like, you think you speak English, but you can't. Something the self takes really personally. Well, now I would just, even if there's a movement of reaction to that, so, oh, okay, it's not, it doesn't mean anything in that sense. It's just a vibration. So there's so much more freedom, so much more relaxation, so much more ease, and everything, even if it hurts, even there's a splinter in the foot. Okay, That's what it is. It's not oh no, what did I do wrong? How do I solve this?
So then I'm really intrigued by then the idea of, I know you're saying even unfolding seems too strong a word. Like then there's this beautiful kind of sense of just, I don't know, like experiencing things as they are, or like a sense of aliveness in being engaged with what is. And I think in that experience, sometimes it, like I'm always really interested. Sometimes in my life, if there's stress, there's an experience of stress, that isn't me, that isn't all of me, that isn't, it's not that in that sense. There can be like it almost feels to me at times there can be, if the awareness is just there of the experience of what is, multiple things can appear simultaneously. So because so many things are there at the same time, it's not personal then.
Yes.
It's like this experience is happening. There's stress, there's joy, there's curiosity. There's a whole bunch of things happening all at once, and so it's very hard to take this so personally. Like that, this is my life. There's way too much going on for it to be so personal.
Yes, yes, that's a great insight because that's exactly how it is. I mean, you lose in that sense, the expression is you lose yourself, but you gain everything.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So just as this conversation, I mean, look at everything. There's look at what comes out. you know, it's crazy. How can we possibly be doing that?
Oh man, it's no, but it's a wild world. Like you know what I mean? Like I sometimes I really I like I really think we lose so much in our labeling of things, that like, you know person, tree, even as you were saying, pen, like, because now, like, leaves, like sometimes when I look out the window and I see through the different seasons, I'm like, wow, that tree has no leaves, now it has leaves. Now they're brown, now they're green. Sometimes like this, or like where I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. But if we just say tree, well, no, that's what a tree does, there's nothing to see here. Like I think there's something about this where, like, from what I'm like what I'm sensing, even just from, well, my own experience, but also what you're saying, like there's this kind of, it's almost like we've taken the wonder out of existence just by either our own beliefs or our own judgments or our own labels of things.
Yes, and at the same time, that is also how it is expressed. So
Yeah,
we express as categorizing, languaging, labeling, judging machines. Okay, but knowing that, see, because immediately there's the tendency, well, oh, that has to stop.
yeah,
Let's stop doing that because we need to be in wonder and awe and like little children and in ecstasy all the time. Well, that would be boring too, right? So the self immediately judges. Even the judging is judged.
yeah.
So I completely agree with you. And life is much better when it's impersonal in that sense, when it's just, and there is much more awe and wonder and joy. I would call it, yeah, it's more like, oh, everything is cool,
Yeah, yeah,
even if it hurts. Um, but but the judging and the categorizing and the languaging and all the stuff we do as humans is also part of what is. And it's not good or bad, it just is. So there's no need to get rid of this or transcend it or improve it. It's just a simple seeing that that's not what we are. We're everything. There is only everything, and that is the ultimate answer.
and I'm not sure if it's like there's a resistance in my body or something. So I'm not sure if some of these questions are coming from a place of curiosity or even resistance, right? So
Does it matter? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, bear with me here. But even then, the sense of, I don't. But I still kind of get the sense then, though, that there is a choice to see. Then, like, the way you're, whatever way it is, like I almost feel, and it's possibly just my own lack of comprehension of it, but there's like, are you then kind of suggesting that there's a choice to, like, even at it's very fundamental, that there's an ability to be aware, or even on some tiny level a slight choice to be aware? Or because I sometimes kind of get confused, and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but just I sometimes get confused even around the topic of free will, that there seems to be something that I can do about it. Like, if everything's fine as it is, as in, okay, well, look, Mark, sometimes we do put these labels on it, but I'm kind of judging the experience of people not falling into awe, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like that there is, I always get some hint of a suggestion of intention or choice in some of these things that I hear, and not from you. I'm talking about in my wider investigation, even into ideas around free will. Have I given enough there for that for that to be understandable as a question of some sort?
Everything you just said is within this paradigm of there being separate selves that can do things. So as you hear yourself speak or ask these questions, what is aware of that? Right? There's something experiencing your life right now. This experience right now is being experienced. That recognizes itself as all there is. And then the mind, so thought, comes up with a question. This question is something we've read or heard, or it's old. It's something that comes up in the mind. The only way to recognize this is to see that we are that in which all these questions and the mind appears. And that's what I mean, that we can't really talk about it, because it's a recognition of what is beyond the talking.
I think that's where that's where there's almost like a resistance in that the mind doesn't want to be made redundant, or
yes, which is a super insight, because that's
yeah.
the only thing standing between us and knowing this. That was all nonsense what I just said, but it's a way of speaking. Is the mind, is thought, because that is the self, right? And the ultimate self, the sense of being a separate self that thinks and does things and knows things. So we try to get this with the mind. It's automatic. You can't stop it. And that's why I talk about this and speak with people and correspond with them, because you often need somebody to box the mind out of the ring. The mind comes up, well, what about this? What about this? So it's just kind of, it's endless until there's the realization that everything that is I can put into language or thought is irrelevant to this question. Because that's like saying, I'm going to discover the sky, okay, the expanse of the sky. But to do that, I'm going to analyze every single cloud. Good luck. But what about this? Here's a cloud about free will. Well, what about that? Let's dive into that. And then we're stuck for 5 years in the free will cloud. And all we have to do is just recognize ourselves as the sky. And even that is too much doing, because we don't do that. The sky recognizes itself as all there is, including the clouds.
This is as I said, this is a really interesting one for me to be discussing on a podcast, because I think there's something I find stunningly beautiful about this, about what you're sharing, and then, as I say, trying to formulate questions on the back of it, or words will still flow. But in other circumstances, I'd just like to sit for 15 minutes with what you've just said.
Yes, and that's the normal situation. So when I have conversations like this, more and more silence starts coming up, because this is a constructed situation where we're actually having a conversation.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
so I know
yeah.
what you mean, because it usually takes longer, and there's much more direct experiencing of this, which creates these breaks and these pauses.
So it's kind of it's interesting because usually in the way I wanted to set up these podcasts was that they were very genuine conversations and genuine experiences, and I almost feel like I'm betraying my own curiosity by talking, if you get me. So I'm experiencing something different at this point. But the sense then of, okay, so what, like, you're you don't write books are writing you then, essentially, like, when you're talking about these what how time is being spent in your life at this point, um is that like, if I were to clumsily ask you to to contain all of this into some kind of reflection on action or experience, when you like when you then uh like, do you feel an impulse to, like, when you write, is it just purely when there's an impulse, like, does life become much more of an instinctual thing, like, is it less planned, how would you categorize that?
Well, it's again you become obvious. No, you become. It becomes obvious that the planning is senseless.
Hmm.
So it's not that you stop planning, or that you stop doing things. It's just that thinking about this. So I can now have a conversation with you about the next couple of chapters I'm going to write in my book, and what the plan will be, and what they're supposed to look like. And at the same time, I know beyond shadow of a doubt that has nothing to do with what is actually happening. So it's always this knowing, and this is already happening. You already act that way. We are already being lived. We just pretend that that's not the case, and we believe that pretending. So that's why it's always, nothing really changes, because it's already going on like that. It's really like the mirage in the desert. The mirage looks like project planning or book planning or whatever. Ooh, I don't know, Gantt chart, whatever it is that we create. And then things happen exactly the way they happen. And the everybody knows really on an instinctual level that the Gantt chart has nothing to do with reality. And then we spend all of work life trying to explain why it sometimes matches the chart and sometimes doesn't. And we have people who are specialized in this, and have university degrees in this. So it becomes very funny in a way.
What's your experience of working with, do you do some work with, do you bring this into the business world as well? Like, I know you, just based on your last book, around leadership, like, how do you how have you seen people both absorb or resist this in your experience of that?
Yes, so I've never been in favor of trying to convince anyone, because that won't work.
Yeah.
But for me, the selfless leadership, or leading from an understanding of no self, no separate self, was a, I guess, a bridge from the work I was doing, which was organizational development consulting and leadership development, to whatever it is I'm doing now. So it made sense for me to first create a version of this. Oh, look, this we can carry this into leadership, because we are humans at work, and leaders are humans most of the time. So it makes sense that you can do this, that you can be this at work as well. And I guess that was the project I had with it, and a coaching program that fit that, and many people who went through that and did in fact gain lots of freedom and joy and clarity in their work as leaders based on these insights. At the same time, it doesn't make sense for me anymore to put that in a program, or here are the 4 steps, or this is the framework. Because yes, for some people it might match. And also, apparently, for me, the interest keeps evolving. So, I mean, it sounds extremely maybe arrogant, but it's just like, okay, I've written the book, read the book. And if you have questions, come, I'm glad to answer them. But who am I to guide you through this understanding? That's one side. And my interest is now moving towards just, people like you, anyone with interest in, oh, there's something about this, but my mind is in the way. And many of those questions are around, well, what about science? What about all these different things we've learned? And now finding out that, as we started the podcast with, that cognitive science and lots of other insights recently actually support this, which is fantastic because it helps the modern mind get over itself. It's like, oh, well, if science even says this, well, then I'll consider it.
Yeah, I think some of the work of David Bohm, or even I interviewed a quantum physicist recently in an unpublished interview, where I just think for me, quantum physics is a great way into, like, there's something beyond my, I don't know, there's something beyond my mental models or the way I'm interpreting reality that doesn't seem to fit.
Yeah.
And it has, like, I almost get like reading about quantum physics for lay people like myself is super like it's an experience, like it's an assault almost on my mind or my sense of reality, like,
Yes.
which I really enjoy. Look, Catherine, just over the course of the time we've been speaking here, and thank you so much for your time here, by the way. This was this is almost not what I hoped it would be, or if you know what I mean, but like I knew this would be like something where I had a sense that this would be something where I'd be left with a lot to contemplate afterwards, and so I really thank you for that. As I generally do a recap at this point of what's been discussed, and I'm
Okay.
not sure I'm not sure how useful or how much utility that would have, but I do always finish with the question of what is a good life for you. And just even within the context of everything that's been discussed, and just however you feel, whatever you feel is an appropriate response to that, even if it's pass. I'd just like your thoughts on that now.
Yeah, life becomes what it's supposed to be, which is free and joyful and ease, pure ease. It's simple and easy and joyful as soon as we understand that we're not limited to being a separate self. There is no separate self. That's it. And what we are is, I find it impossible to put it into words. I can't describe it. So I always stop there. I stop with what we're not. And then you can find out what we are.
I I love this, and look, I would implore, not even you do what you want, I guess, people, but to listen to this and to almost, for me, what I'll be doing after when I'm listening back to this is almost to see where I'm caught, to see where I'm trapped, to see what I'm attached to, in terms of, I have a very clear feeling when you're speaking here that what you're, I know that it's an inexact science putting words to this feeling, but there's something that you're pointing to, even that makes me feel that there's so much for me to explore within this. So look, I'm really grateful for your time, Catherine. This is a really, really fascinating experience for me, and yeah, I look forward to seeing whatever is created in your next book as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the latest from the What is a Good Life podcast. My name's Mark McCartney. I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm also a coach based in Berlin. Over the last 2 years, I've interviewed over 150 people around this question, and I've distilled these findings, anecdotes, and experiences into both corporate workshops and one-on-one coaching programs. If you're a corporate looking to book a workshop for your next event, or you're a working professional in need of finding answers to some of the bigger questions in life, please direct message me below for a free 30-minute consultation.